The music of Jethro Tull. And I must say that I'm excited and delighted that I am finally face-to-face with Ian Anderson. Ian, I must say I'm somewhat in awe of you. I've met probably almost everybody in this business and have always looked forward to meeting you. And maybe it's because you've kind of kept yourself rather private when it comes to the media. Do you have a particular reason for that?
Well, it's not really a question of privacy, it's a question of my efforts in the more obvious outlets of playing concerts and making records that keeps me away from the sort of leisure time.
In other words, it wasn't anything personal.
Oh, certainly not. No,
I mean personally me, but I mean personally with interviewing or reporters or people who probe your head or pick your brain or
No,
whatever.
not at all. I mean, I allow about a month a year, obviously not in one block, but in terms of days here and days there for doing interviews and photo sessions and press receptions and all that sort of thing. But you must remember that apart from the United States, we're also obliged to spread ourselves rather thinly.
There is the rest of the world, isn't there?
The rest of the world does in fact exist, yes. I'm living evidence of that.
Are you aware of the fact that you have created a particular aura in the milieu of progressive music that few other groups can claim? A kind of a prestige, an eminence that elicits more awe, as I feel, or more respect than for most other, quote, rock groups.
Well, it's very gratifying to hear you say that, but I would suggest that, amongst the major groups of the world, most of whom are, of course, from Britain, but you've got your Mick Jaggers and your Elton Johns and your David Bowies and your Who's and your...
Absolutely, but
and they're all every bit as full of charisma in their own right, and
yes,
possibly more full than I
different.
am.
Jethro Tull is different. It's, I don't know. It's like, to me, Mick Jagger's the kind of performer where you get up down to the front where you, hey, Mick, how are you, baby? That kind of thing. It's kind of a funky relationship where I don't feel that. And I've observed that the audience, they're rather a kind of much more separated. They seem to be, it's a more mysterious charisma than relatable.
Well, let's suggest this is a proposition then, that I, rather than treating audiences as a mass and inviting them to respond as a mass, as a collective entity, I do set out to entertain people on a one-to-one basis, and however impossible that might be in, say, Madison Square Gardens, I nonetheless make that attempt to reach people as individuals, all with their own special traits and characters. I mean, I look at separate people, I play to separate people, and I hope that the music that I play and sing to them is something that means something separate and different to each individual in the audience. I tend to discourage sort of mass hysteria because I find it to be a separate entity that has little to do with the music. I mean, one can boogie on a sublime and yet ridiculous level without really getting much of the music, if you see what I mean. So I don't actively discourage it, but I try to present them with something different, which is a more personal and intimate approach, which is difficult in the big venues that we play.
This is exactly what I was getting at, and I think that I know it's so unique because it waters down the enjoyment, as far as I'm concerned, of a lot of the music because of the fact that apparently a lot of groups have not figured out what you figured out, and that with that kind of mass hysteria that comes from over those footlights, there's a certain lack of understanding and enjoyment of the music. I mean, it's just not possible. You can't be shouting and listening at the same time. The music of Jethro Tull from the current album, Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die, one of the longer titles, but it packs a wallop. Our guest today in the studio, Ian Anderson. That title, Ian, is... the
sort of title to invite a lot of criticism and reaction, which is one of the reasons it's there.
Is it ever? Such a controversial bunch of words. Have you experienced that as you've traveled around? Has it offended some people? Has it...
Well, no, it merely invites the sort of questions, are you too old to rock and roll? I mean, directed at me, or is Mick Jagger too old to rock and roll, or are we all too old to rock and roll? Maybe we should give way to something else. And unless people are prepared to ask those questions, I think we will eventually necessarily give way to something else. Rock music must constantly revitalize itself by questioning its own validity at any point in time. As indeed a newspaper like Rolling Stone, as soon as it stops to question itself as an authority, becomes merely part of the establishment, part of the media system, and for me ceases to have any validity at all because of the motivation. It's stopped asking questions of itself.
Yes.
You know, I think rock music as a music style of the last 15 years or so is in danger of taking itself for granted.
Or too
It's
seriously?
becoming almost, well, not seriously enough in my opinion. I mean, it's become a definite money spinner, a definite commercial enterprise. The rock industry embodies huge companies, hundreds of thousands of employees, and turns over millions and millions of dollars, pounds sterling, German marks, etc. every year. And consequently, it has now become a system which people are reluctant to have upset. And unless we're prepared to ask questions like, you know, are we all too old to rock and roll? Or is indeed what we're doing rock and roll any longer? Is it not perhaps something else?
Ian, do you think there is any cure, any panacea for what I call the ailing of music today? I find that its biggest detriment is the sameness, the repetitive quality. Every band that comes out today sounds like, it reminds me of a game of charades, you know, sounds like a band that's been before. An arrangement sounds like one we've heard before. It just seems to be on a treadmill. Do you think there's any cure for this kind of sickness?
Well, there are many panaceas, but not very many cures. I think the only cure is a constant turnover of both artists and people. I mean, I hate to take your job away from you, but people in your position, you know, they must be coming and going. There must be a revitalization of input from different sources. That obviously, once the rock media or the rock entity becomes established, you know, people who have risen over a period of years to being in positions of authority and perhaps a little control,
They become stale.
They become a little bit insecure, perhaps. They want to hang on to that job and remain at the top. Therefore, they don't want to see too many changes. And I would direct this criticism at myself and people like me who are in rock groups. We don't want to give way, you know, to younger groups. We don't want to revitalize through standing down and letting somebody else have a go. You know, we tend to hang on to our position of authority. And unless we're prepared to do that by inviting new groups to appear with us on concert tours, if we're not prepared to help new groups find their way and pass on to them some of the experience and technical knowledge that we've attained through playing concerts and making records over a number of years, then we're not going to help that process about.